Welcome back to The Watch, and let's dive into House of the Dragon Episode 3. In this episode, there wasn't as many big, kind of shocking moments, and some might actually say that it was a much slower episode and find it uninteresting. For me, I'm just a sucker for good dialogue, okay? Especially with scenes that are significant in the sense that something is happening. Something important is happening, and it's leading somewhere. And that's what I think you can really define this episode in. It's a set-up episode where there's something brewing, something building, and it's about to explode. You can almost even feel some of their pressure expanding before that explosion. And it's all kind of pointed at a confrontation at Harrenhal, with Sir Cole taking, a large army, or a sizable army, because they mentioned it wasn't as large as they could get, and Daemon already at Harrenhal. That seems to be where some things are going. Now, I will give some overall thoughts quickly and then dive into spoilers, but genuinely, I still really enjoyed this episode. Such great dialogue in conversations between characters, showing that they understand who these characters are. And one of the things I also really appreciate and enjoy about this episode are, when I say politics, but it's the setup of the politics, all the moving parts, because when you have a show that's well written, and this House of the Dragon is very well written, and I'm referring to this episode as well, episode 3, you can understand those parts and then kind of speculate what could happen, because there's a lot of debate of what people should do in this episode, with different plans being proposed, and also kind of criticism levied against certain characters regarding inaction versus action. One of the themes of the episode seems to be what could they do to avoid a war? That is Rhaenyra's perspective. Yet her actions seem to be the type of actions that are only going to cause it to be of greater bloodshed and fallout in the end, even though she's claiming that she's seeking for a way for peace. So it's kind of hard to talk about a lot of those, moving parts without going to spoil. So I'm just going to dive in. That's your warning, spoilers, but still great episode. If you haven't seen it, check it out. Like I said, it's a setup episode building towards something bigger, but that building, those building blocks are really engaging, and I can enjoy some of these scenes and dialogues. I find them as dynamic as nearly as even great fight scenes. So, spoilers, okay? Rhaenyra is wanting to avoid war, and it's kind of sparked by a conversation she has early on in the episode with Rhaenys, which is kind of rich coming from Rhaenys. Rhaenys is saying, there was a good line for her where it says, something about war being bloody and battle with dragons is bloody evil, but much better wordplay than my poor remembrance and paraphrasing of it. Good line, somewhat rich coming from her. For almost like two big reasons. Remember, she is responsible for the greatest kind of act of shedding innocent blood, like when she burst through the ground in the coronation ceremony, just murdered heaps of innocent people, right? And so, her saying, we should try and protect innocent lives, when it sounds kind of rich coming from her when she's responsible to a lot of it. And also, when she is trying to propose that isn't there a way to avoid greater bloodshed, when she could have ended the war right then. She had basically all the important greens right in front of her, and she could have just flamed them completely and ended the war. And so for two reasons, little rich hypocritical, and then trying to pose that, because there is a kind of line, I think it comes from either Rhaenys or a bit later on, or Rhaenyra, but the sentiment seems to be expressed by both of them, that men are eager to see battle and bloodshed. Yet when it's the inaction of the women, actually, that is causing, or going to cause, clearly, far more bloodshed overall. Several times, the guys have been saying we need to act decisively to put an end, and put an end to the conflict quickly. And that does mean acting decisively, somewhat violently at times. But the the women in this show, and I'm not saying that women overall, I guess, because if you look at history, women leaders were not reluctant to go to war, historically. But in the show, they are very reluctant to push it to that extreme, to be that they feel like they're the ones who are now turning it into a hot war. That inaction is losing opportunities where they could have ended the conflict much, much sooner. And look at the discussion that we're having here, right? That there's so much meat that you can latch onto to criticize actions, but it's valid for them choosing those actions because you understand their perspective. And speculate what they could have done differently. That all points to a very rich, detailed world where the events and circumstances are well set up and defined, and you kind of know some of the logistics at play here to the point where then you can start, to speculate about what's going on. Brilliant. I love that we have a show with such consistent world building as this, that we can dive into that type of discussion and speculation. And so the episode opens with, I forget their names, it's like Blackthorns or someone, but it's that long-standing grudge between two houses. But what I liked about this scene is how it reflects the lower level politics between different noble lords. And it rings true because that's what it was like historically as well. People often think about, the medieval politics as the grand scale, the kings and the queens, and how they handled discussion between one another, when a lot of the politics was the lower level kind of disagreements and conflicts between these lesser lords that had more involvement with the lesser folk and about what's going on the ground. And of course, sometimes they had bigger implications and not, but I enjoyed that, they're arguing over the position of border stones. It felt real. It's like, this seems like one of those, conflicts that absolutely could have happened, say, in our own history. And it's a good setup because these two houses have such a strong conflict going back generations that they use the current, pending civil war as justification to just try and wipe the other out. And they say, I've sworn to this side, sworn to that side. They're insulting one another. And then it kind of builds up to possible, and then cuts to after a conflict and everyone's dead. It's effective. I always like to see a battle, right? And we kind of skipped a really big one, and also means seemingly a significant one. Budget, I know, I get all that. If they had the budget, I do imagine, a good kind of build-up, great battle, and they could have added some investment and suspense by indicating that whoever wins this conflict could help, tip the scales to one side or the other, which would cause the audience to be really invested in the outcome of the fight and have the big fight, and then have it that, they just basically wipe each other out and there was no winners, would have been a cool kind of conclusion where if you were siding for one side really strongly and no one wins, you could be have that good emotional response. But instead they just cut to one of the characters who was discussing the conflict in the previous scene with a sword through his neck, and it's a bloodbath. I should mention some other kind of broad things, because I know we're going through chronologically, but some other broad things of the episode that I would usually cover in the pre-one, but we jump to the spoiler section pretty soon. But there are some things, on a broad sense, I want to mention about it. There's some more explicit nudity in this episode that I don't think was needed at all. It does have an interesting implication as to Aemon's character and how his relationship with his brother and stuff like that. I have to wait to see how important that scene was, because I'm not sure it was so needed, the explicit nudity and other certain acts depicted. I just don't think they were necessary. And there were some certain sexualized acts shown that were very explicit, so explicit that it's going to be way too much for a lot of people. That is like they would never consider watching the show because of that level of graphic sexual stuff thrown on the screen. It's brief, but it's pretty darn graphic, right? And I think it just harms the show when they throw that in, because like those they were kind of off to the side, but they were so brief. They didn't do anything to add to the show, and it can just serve to harm it more. Where there were, I get that there were sexual acts and stuff in the first season, and it was toned down from Game of Thrones. Though this one, like, in this episode, it's actually a bit of give and take, where it is not as prevalent in Game of Thrones, but what they showed in this episode was far more explicit than anything they've shown in Game of Thrones before. Like actual pornography level stuff, right? And look, just they showed someone basically getting fellatioed, to be as delicate as I can, and they're pretty full on in your face. So like I said, far more explicit, small, and so I don't think it helps the show at all. Anyway, so it's worth commenting on that. All right, going back to the more chronological kind of thing. Look, they're handling Cole really well, and he is an unlikable character, but that's done intentionally. And you can see the conflict. The first scene where we're showing him in this episode, he feels out of his element, acting now as hand to the king. There is good conflict between him and Alicent. They don't understand where their relationship is. And they do something, I think, quite clever with Cole, where they show two sides to him. One side where he is very decisive and competent, and it's battle, okay? This guy is a really, really good warrior and fighter, and he understands battlefield tactics and things. Having said that, he makes a lot of mistakes because he's also seemingly like very inexperienced when it comes to larger politics and how to maneuver those politics. And so, there's fallout of him sending the twin of the King's Guard to try and kill Rhaenyra and end, the war. He says, but he is almost given credit for acting decisively as well. But I like that they show he feels out of his depth, though as soon as, he hesitates in the council room where people are discussing things, they're going back and forth, and he's quiet for the first part. But when he starts to speak, he's pretty clear about what he thinks needs to happen. And again, good dynamic character that they have here, because you can understand where his decision-making comes from, but you can also understand it might be really poor choices. He could be really good with the actual smaller details of a battle, how to defeat this unit of men and noticing where the enemy is. But as to the larger, discussion of when to attack with an army and where to maneuver an army, he could be really bad at that. And so that's in the show. You can see those sides done really well. And, of course, the part in the episode where he notices the dragon and saves Alicent's brother, in line with his character, shows some of the competence, gets Alicent's brother to like him a bit more because he was not liking Cole, especially taking the role of his father. One thing, observation I do have with Alicent's brother, seems like that's the same guy that Daemon dehorsed in I think it was the first episode of season 1. And he was clearly old enough to compete in a tournament, so at least 18 and somewhere in his 20s. A lot of time has passed since then, and the guy still looks like his early 30s or in his 20s or something like that. Doesn't look old enough, because he's older than Alicent, remember? And so this is, how many years after the events then? At least 20, if not more. And look, Cole doesn't look like he's aged either, so there are those things. We get to see Harrenhal in more detail. Not in his glory days, but an actual good sweeping shot. And it looks brilliant. The effects look brilliant. The model looks really detailed, and it conveys the size of Harrenhal. And we get to see more of Harrenhal that we ever did before, basically. And even the internal, atmosphere and how they designed the sets, it's just great. Really, really cool. And this is where Daemon has arrived. Daemon has flown to Harrenhal, and he's basically taking the castle. I was at first a little dubious, wondering, why aren't there any guards stopping him? But it's answered pretty quickly, where they're basically surrendering to him. I can't really fight a dragon, and so him running into one guard kind of makes sense. The scene between Daemon and the Castellan, I believe the terminology is, of the castle is really good. It reveals some interesting stuff between, Daemon, he's not very good with diplomacy. and the person he's talking with, they're giving subtle hints that he is. And he even goes like he knows he's on the back foot and he doesn't have many much leverage over Daemon, yet I do think he, is subtly manipulating him. But there are times when Daemon's like, no, we're doing this, and you can't argue. It's like, as you say, my lord. But small little things like calling him my prince instead of my liege, Daemon corrects him, but then later he does it again. And I think that's absolutely intentional. And he's like, and he corrects my liege and stuff. And I think those are just all subtle things he's doing on purpose to put Daemon on the back foot or get him thrown off a little bit. And people like they'd only be able to achieve subtle things like that if the writers are smart. And it's a reflection on it. So great dialogue in that scene. And that's what I mean. So we have some really good dialogue here. Even though the one between Rhaenys and Rhaenyra, and Rhaenys, coming off a bit hypocritical, the actual, word, play being presented, brilliant. And so at this point, I'm just thoroughly enjoying the episode. They also reveal that what the Strongs really think of Clubfoot, I forget it is an actual name, escapes me, it comes and goes. Again, interesting, they do think he is responsible for the death of the Strongs. All the things that's happening here is just intriguing stuff that no line seems to be wasted either. I might be jumping, out of the chronology, but I do want to mention something that what I think is actually one of the bigger moments in this episode, but I wonder how many people latch onto it and consider it more significant than maybe I'm putting too much into it. But Daemon has a bit of a dream sequence, or his delusion, and I think it's caused because he wakes up in front of the weirwood tree, and so it's kind of playing with the concept of maybe Harrenhal is actually haunted. But Daemon has a dream sequence where he's walking through Harrenhal and he opens a door and he comes across the young Rhaenyra. This was like one of those slap in the face kind of scenes. She's sewing on the head of the child that died, and of course Daemon was the one who caused that to happen. And he asks what she's doing, and she says, I'm cleaning up your problems like always. And Daemon shows legitimate regret on his face looking at the decapitated child. And I think there was I might have to just rewatch this, double check, because I remember that it looked like he was tearing up, or even there was a tear coming down his face of that he legitimately regrets having caused the death of the child. And that is significant for Daemon, because Daemon poses, and he's got this really hard exterior, but there are moments where they show a much softer, dare I say, compassionate side to Daemon. Look at how he treated his brother, okay? That he felt sympathy for him. He thought he was weak and was critical, but at the same time, he supported him, walked him to his throne, handed the crown to him. That Daemon might actually have a softer, compassionate side that he rarely lets show, or rarely even kind of indulges, because I think he pushes it down and acts pretty mercilessly in many instances. I'm not saying he's a good person, but I just love seeing those different sides of his character. And this one here showed some of the most vulnerability and regret and moral kind of compass that we've ever seen from Daemon. Like this is, something, if he actually regrets this and is showing that emotion on his face, that's showing that he actually has... And look, he does have a code of ethics in the sense of being loyal to family, stuff like that, but this time it feels like it might be reflecting some actual morality, which might be completely thrown out the window a bit later on. But I personally loved seeing that scene where they showed that Daemon possibly... Because, again, this is show, not tell. And I love that they're showing these things and trusting the audience to reach their own conclusions, but being consistent with the characters in their actions. And, showing that softer side, I thought, helped well. And I don't think it's helping because it's subtle with Daemon, where, look at Aemon, the eye patch guy, right? I think they're making him out to look really weak, and especially this scene, they had a full frontal nude scene with him as well, where it's just like... It's not necessary. They had a good scene with the king when so the king is counseled not to go to war, but then he basically is putting on the armor ready to go, and Clubfoot comes and manipulates him quite deftly to not end up going. And what he said was intriguing. He says there's two rumors, people are celebrating the king going off to war, but some also say, and I think Larys, see, I told you his name comes and goes, Larys Strong, is lying through his teeth on the next one, and it's all purely to manipulate Aegon, or he says some say that the king has been manipulated on purpose by the council so he can go away and Alicent will reign instead. And that's interesting but also significant because Larys has shown a lot of loyalty to Alicent in all the part, but this episode, he's seemingly throwing Alicent under the bus because he's ingratiating himself to the king. Before, Alicent was the one who had the power, basically. The king was getting weaker, and she was able to act as queen regent, basically. Now she's the queen, I forget the terminology, dowager, queen dowager, and she doesn't have the influence or power. And so he, Larys is going to the one with power and wanting to get close to him. And basically he gets set up as the Master of Whisperers in that scene as a result. And it works as well. Aegon doesn't fly off to the battle. Good scene. And just consistent character work that I'm very much enjoying. I had a question when... So Cole needs to ride up to Alicent's brother who wants to stay at an inn instead of camping with the soldiers, and is ignoring Cole, and Cole looks to the sky and he says we're exposed, and he manages to see the dragon. And all right, granted, you look at a broad, wide sky and you can see him moving, thinking, okay, I can grant that he can identify, he could notice the dragon. The dragon rider, which is one of Daemon's daughters, she's one of the Valerian girls, the older daughter, she's flying on a dragon and she notices a glint on the ground, which seems to be a glint of steel. She dives down, it seems like with the intent to kill whoever that is. And I'm thinking, how do you know who that is? How do you know that's an enemy warranting enough to dive? Maybe she was diving first to see who it was. When she gets closer, she notices one of them is wearing, armor of the King's Guard, and then concluding who's the most likely person to be, and then she gets close enough and maybe recognizes the hair color and assumes, yes, that's Cole, and gets really close and can confirm it. So, look, with a charitable interpretation, it can be explained. Being more uncharitable, it seems like she noticed who that was at far too great a distance and dived down to kill him, and then they get to safety and she didn't manage it. So I could go either way with it, but I did have that question mark. So then we come to the larger larger dialogue scene that the episode basically ends off, which is Rhaenyra has been going through the episode being somewhat indecisive. There's council scenes where there are people imploring her to act and she wants to avoid war, which I think is good, but I also feel by what is shown, what she ultimately concludes here, is that it's insincere. If she truly wanted to save people's lives, and that was her actual concern, she could end the war pretty easily, and that's just surrender, give up your claim, okay? She can't do that. And so this idea that, the only chance for peace is through Rhaenyra talking with Alicent, when neither of them are willing to actually give up anything of significance to save people's lives, shows that their voiced, expressions of concern about let's avoid a war are hollow, okay? And they are not good rulers. These aren't good people. I said I was kind of still on the green side, though, before, and I'm on no one side, I think, now, because they're all basically, bad people. Even, at the moment, the Blacks seem like they're willing to try and at least push for peace more, but what are they willing to sacrifice to do it? What was her plan really? Because in the discussion she has with Alicent, she basically, effectively, saying, you should just let me be the queen. And expecting Alicent to give up. And Alicent is actually in a much more difficult position to do that because she has no power to. Okay, asking Alicent to make peace, and like, you'd think Rhaenyra would understand it, and this is probably my biggest criticism with the episode, because I don't think this makes sense, is that Rhaenyra's plan to try and make peace with Alicent could never work. Alicent is not in power. Her son is. He is now king. Okay? So, even if she says, yes, I'll make peace, it's not going to do anything. The king's son has been murdered in his own bed. He wants revenge. There is no hope that any conversation with Alicent is going to end that conflict. Not logically. Not if they were to be true to the characters and actually be honest about who has the influence and power. Yet Rhaenyra does have that power. She can command her side to back down, and what about the safety of her children? She still has a claim to the throne. The way that they would do this in the medieval period, and Game of Thrones does this explicitly a lot, right, is that the children would be taken as wards of the other side, to be raised the other side. They show that the Starks are doing that at the beginning of Game of Thrones with... is it Greyjoy? You know, that guy. You know who I mean, if you're familiar with the series, right? And that was something that, you know, legitimately could be done, right? Oh, but she too afraid of her children, they have heir thrones, that could be cool. Then just, you have a lot of money, you have influence, go to a place of safety. Is it Pentos or something, where Daemon was? Or some place that is far enough away that you can try and hide away. And this is the other thing as well. Rhaenyra has shown that she likes the comforts of being a royal. Kristen Cole, when, you know, they were younger, when she was younger, right, said, let's run away together. We could be happy. We could, you know, and she couldn't let go of her throne, like of her royalty, because she's attached to that type of stuff. So they've shown that in her character, that she's not going to give up her power. When an actual good person, right, if they were thinking about the situation, I have the means to save almost millions of lives and prevent a war, but it requires giving up my power and my claim on the throne. A good person would take that, not a problem. And she has still enough money to live comfortably for the rest of her life, okay? This is Game of Thrones. I know it's not going to happen, but it's worth analysing this, going the logic through, and calling out some of well, it's not inconsistent with her character, right? Because I think if anyone is approaching this, the writers looking at this, they would be aware of these things too. That that Rhaenyra is basically still very selfish, and her supposed claims of wanting to seek peace and prevent war is full of crap, okay? Because she actually has the power to do it, but she's not going to do it because that would take too much sacrifice and she's selfish. And then the fact that she thinks Alicent... So that one, like I said, I think that's consistent. It's just a flaw with her character, but it's there purposely. But this next part, the fact that she thinks Alicent, as I mentioned, has even the power to prevent the war by just... Even if Alicent says, yes, I agree, I'll give all the things to you, it's not going to happen. It's impossible. And so that, I think, is a bit of an issue. Just doesn't make sense. And you would think Rhaenyra would be smart enough to realise that. Seemingly doesn't. The scene, of course, plays out anyway. The way that she sneaks into the city, I think that works enough, although the fact that she would be absent from Dragonstone, and if she didn't tell anyone she's leaving, that would be a massive alarm bells. I know Dragonstone isn't necessarily too far away from King's Landing, but still, it's a thing for concern. It's like, if she just disappears, what the heck? I think that would be, freaking out that she's gone, wondering where the heck... I mean, she did disappear with her dragon before, so I guess it could be in line with the character, especially the dragon's missing, but she went by boat this time. Now, to the actual conversation. Alicent, she says to Rhaenyra what Viserys said to her on his death, and basically unknowingly reveals to Rhaenyra that Viserys didn't really proclaim Aegon as king. He was talking about Aegon the Conqueror. And she kind of says that to Alicent, that this is about the Song of Ice and Fire. And Alicent, it's like she does believe Rhaenyra, but things have gone too far, and she can't accept that, because that would mean that everything she's done, the deaths that have been caused, putting her son Aegon on the throne, all was based on a misunderstanding. And Alicent, and I think this is perfectly in line with the character, Alicent is too proud to admit such a devastating fault, that she could have made such a grave error that is causing all of these problems. Even if she might know it deep down, sunken cost fallacy. Too much has happened, and can't change it. And so she says to Rhaenyra, there has been no mistake. And she doubles down, even though you can clearly see that there's doubt in her eyes. So I wonder what they'll do with that going into the future, but of course, things are going to get messy. The line where, Rhaenyra says this to Alicent in this scene, where men are eager for battle to seek blood and glory, and it's only us women who is going to prevent the war. And it's just like, if the men were able to act more decisively, even early on, they would have acted pretty viciously, but ended the things quicker before it escalated into such bloodshed and war. And that the actions of these two women are not the actions that are going to avoid loss of life. So it's a bit rich that she's saying that, and the show seems clear enough by what's going on that line that she says is in line with her character, yet clearly false by the events and contextualization of everything that's going on around, especially what they've done in the past, right? And it's not, that women are necessarily less bloodthirsty than men, okay, because women can do some pretty awful things. It's that Rhaenyra actually believes it. And it's also part of a character being indecisive. And Daemon called her out on that she is like, Viserys. Viserys was very indecisive, wanted to avoid battle and war, and actually caused some larger problems as a result. He made mistakes, even though I really like his character. Rhaenyra seems to be making similar mistakes and perfectly in line with the character. And so then the episode ends with Alicent basically saying there is no mistake, walking off, and with the hanging implication that things are going to get messy. So overall, still really great episode with that little niggling kind of criticism at the end. Like, for me, it wasn't slower. I can understand why people might see it as much slower. I found everything engaging, and I enjoyed the build-up, and I enjoyed the exploration of the characters, and I'm loving the show. Looking forward to episode 4, where I do think things are going to really get... I said messy a lot, but yeah, they will get that. I think we're going to see some fighting, and I will be back with the review of episode 4. So, as always, stay on watch.